Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
And by the way, you can stream us live, and we have people listening live right this minute. I see all sorts of people online. I can look at that right now. You just go to either bjshow.co, or if you go to egbert.com, E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com, and there's a little goofy thing with Egbert's face there. You have to click on his nose. It'll take you to our streaming channel. John Combest. John, first off, I have a couple of new things that I want to run by you, and I'm going to play you something. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this. Okay, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, tell me who you think of when you hear this. Okay, here we go. You ready?
Yep.
How do you know all this? What are you, some kind of real estate agent?
Oh, he's a realtor. There is a difference somehow.
Did you hear that?
I did hear that. Yeah, who do I think of? I think of the North County legend Afshari. Remember Afshari?
Yes.
That's who I think of. And was Afshari just like Cher? Was Afshari just have one name? Was it like a Cher or Madonna?
Do you know the crazy thing about this? My mom knew him.
No way, really?
Yeah, he was, I believe, a teacher in the Hazelwood School District, believe it or not.
Did he retire a millionaire? I heard, according to Dave Ramsey, he's likely to be a millionaire.
Well, unfortunately, I believe he retired bankrupt.
Oh, wow, that story took a sad turn.
Well, I can still tell you to this day, if you go on the St. Louis County Collector's Office website, there are all sorts of pieces of property that he owns that are in what's called post-third sale. Do you know what that's all about?
I don't know.
Post-third sale is in St. Louis County. If you don't pay your taxes on real estate taxes in 3 years, your property goes up for auction. They auction it year number 1. If nobody bids on it, it goes to year number 2. And if nobody bids on it, then year number 3. And if nobody bids, essentially after 6 years of not paying taxes, it goes in what they call post-third sale. And essentially anybody can come along with no recourse, in other words, no recourse by the owner, and pay the taxes and end up with the property. And what's interesting about it is and I know this because I'm a property nerd. You didn't know that about me. But he mapped out a bunch of subdivisions in North County that he never built. And what's interesting is you may drive by and see various lots, large lots, 20, 30, 40 acres in North County and think, wow, look at that. It's already been mapped out and there's street names and addresses and the whole bit, but it's his company. And apparently, I double check on this, he went bankrupt and essentially just walked away from everything he had.
Wow.
Now, the story is my mom knew him not real well. If my mom were still alive, I could call her up and she could tell the whole story. But the story was he was always he was an immigrant from, I can't remember which country he was from, and an interesting guy, and he worked his butt off, and he taught school during the day, and I think my mom says he was a waiter at like Tony's restaurant or something like that at night, and made some pretty decent money on the side, working tips as a waiter, and he invested in real estate. And anybody who lives in North County will know there was one Afshari strip center, and then there was a second one, and that was Afshari 2, and then there was Afshari 3. Am I kidding, John?
No, that's true. I mean, his name was all over North County.
And there was 90s. Afshari 4, Afshari 5, Afshari 6, Afshari 7. And he had his offices were this really interesting building on 270, on the south side of 270, between New Halls Ferry and West Florissant, which was a strange-looking building. And that was his corporate headquarters. And I believe they tore it down, and I believe it's a car dealership now. So anyway, that's my nerd stuff. Okay, now, can I do one other thing for you, John?
Yeah, of course.
Over the weekend, I had a very frustrating weekend repairing stuff, which it's always fun when you're repairing a piece of equipment and you spend literally hours and maybe $100 worth of parts, and you put the new equipment back online and you flip the circuit breaker and the thing comes alive and you go, oh, I fixed it. And 5 minutes later, it starts to smoke. And 10 minutes later, the circuit breaker pops. So that's been sort of my weekend. Okay, so when I was working on stuff, I was listening to some podcasts. And I'm gonna if you don't mind, I'm gonna play 1 minute of this podcast, and you might pick up on who the person is, but take a listen to this. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'll feed it back down the line to you so you can hear it. Okay, here we go.
We've lost our way out of good intent. This is called a prosperous empire. I was a very poor student, but there was one class I was good at, history, and I never understood why until I got into my early 40s. I'm obsessed with pattern recognition. I know things don't change. I know humans definitely don't change. Circumstances changes, platforms changes, mediums change. We are the Roman Empire. Listen, America's got its things, what doesn't? But I promise you, nobody's leaving. So this is a remarkable place, but we must also acknowledge we've had a level of prosperity for so long that we're soft. People are complaining about going to an office 5 days a week as if we're like hanging them from trees. It's insanity. By the way, I want everybody to hear this. I'm not proposing that we need to be in the office 5 days a week. I believe in technology, I believe in Zoom, I believe in efficiency. That's not what I'm proposing. I'm asking this room, are we paying attention to what people complain about?
Okay, do you know who that is?
Yeah, it's Gary Vee.
Gary Vee. For those of you who don't know who Gary Vee is, his real name is Vaynerchuk or something like that. Gary's an interesting guy. His family immigrated from Russia when he was a young boy, I think like 4 or 5 years old. Didn't speak a word of English, has come to this country, and now is a multi-millionaire. The interesting story of his father, they lived in a one-room, like wasn't even like an apartment. It was like sort of like a closet kind of place in New York when they first moved over here. His father took a job as essentially a janitor at a liquor store. And he worked his butt off at the liquor store and essentially worked his way up to the point where he worked from being the janitor to the manager of the liquor store, and then became to the point where he thought to himself, this is America, I could start my own liquor store. So he moved across the river to New Jersey and started up his own liquor store. And where Gary enters the picture, and I think this is like near the very beginning of YouTube, Gary would do a weekly, I think it was even daily. I think it was called Wine Talk, where at the time you couldn't stream stuff live on YouTube. You had, you recorded and you put the show up. And every day he would do a discussion on wines because he got to be really good at wines. He knew the various different things about wine, which I'll never understand. I mean, to me, the cheaper it is, the better it tastes. But that's just me because I'm screwed in the head. Anyway, Gary is one of these savant kind of guys that every time I listen to him, he puts my mind in a growth mode. And when I heard this, and he does a lot of public speaking, this is some seminar he was at, where I'm thinking to myself, him and I are on the same page. We're the Roman Empire. We're a bunch of softies. How many times have I said this on the show so far, John?
Very often, yeah. And I mean, that's Gary's whole thing is motivation.
Right. And the point being, not that we have to go back to working 7 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day, but his point that drew me in was, if you go back and look at history, and he talks about this, talks about the fact of pattern recognition. And there's that classic saying, what is it? Those who fail to learn by history are bound to repeat it. Isn't that something that I get that close?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. The idea being is, once again, what are we complaining about? And once again, what are we complaining about? We're complaining about all sorts of crazy crap, like, oh my God, it's perfect example. Okay. 2 things on Friday. I listened to the noon show. What's her name? Elaine Chao?
Elaine Chao, yeah.
Okay.
Cha.
And she talks like that. She has these students, some from Washington University, plus one faculty member, plus a law student from St. Louis U, who are all arrested. And first off, let me put it to you this way. Every last one of them sounded like, oh, don't touch me. You might hurt my manicure. Get what I'm saying?
Yeah, very delicate.
Yes, okay. And I'm not saying sexually. They just sounded like, to the point where it's like, and they were all like, we can't believe what happened. They called the police on us. And the police showed up, and they were not kind to us. Matter of fact, they were somewhat forceful. Well, what they're not telling is they were warned repeatedly, leave. And once again, John, who has history because he has a degree from Washington University. The difference between Washington University and UMSL and University of Missouri Columbia, what's the big difference, John?
Well, it's quite a selective university, I think it's fair to say, and it's quite expensive.
But the big difference is it's privately owned.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not.
The land on Washington University, when you saw people protesting, that is not public property. That's not UMSL. That's not the Arch Grounds. It's not Forest Park. It's a private university.
Right. And if you are the owner of said property and someone essentially comes onto your property and does something you don't like, and it's to the point where if you've ever watched these videos, matter of fact, I watch all these crazy, stupid videos, the crazy nuts that Walmart finally gives up on, and they call the police. And there's always a term that the police use. The police confront these people and they say, you have been trespassed. And essentially, the owner of that property, in this case, Walmart, has called the police and said, this person is disruptive. This person is causing problems at my place of business, which is privately owned. I want them removed. Okay? And essentially, that's what happened at Washington University, correct?
That's exactly right.
The university, whatever they were, the hierarchy, the high muckety-mucks in their ivory towers said, we don't like what's going on. We want these people removed. So the campus police and St. Louis County Police, what was it? You had the report. Was it like 6 or 7 different munis showed up as well, too?
Yeah, several of them.
Yes.
Correct.
And they essentially removed these people. Well, now they're on KWMU saying, oh, my God, we were forcibly removed, and I had to go to the county jail. You know, one of those things, what does that tell you? It tells you that they thought they were going to have the ace up their sleeve and they're going to protest. And unlike, like you pointed out, unlike Mizzou or UMSL or what used to be Southwest Missouri State, or any of the other publicly owned universities, the ground is public, whereas Washington University is private. And I'm listening to these people, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I think they were treated too nicely. You know that, and
with kid gloves. It seems like, and you know, there's always going to be an example of a terrible visual of a police officer making a grunting face, and some old person, you know, like wincing in terror, and those will be the visuals that the local media and that activists promote.
Well, and I talked about this, the fact that I'm a graduate. My undergraduate degree is SIU Edwardsville. Supposedly, well, not supposedly, but one of the professors from SIU Edwardsville was at the Washington University protest. And he claims he was almost killed by the police. That's what he said. He said he's almost killed. He's got X amount of broken ribs, and he's got a broken arm that he claims is going to have surgery. Okay, so I ask you, John, if a police officer comes up to you and says, John, move. I'm telling you right now, move. You're not supposed to be here. You're trespassing. Move right now. You can do one of two things. You can say, okay, sir, I will essentially, adhere to your command. Or I could say, tough luck, I ain't moving, buddy. And what do you think the reaction's going to be of the police officer?
The police officer will move you. And if your preference is to become a local mini celebrity and be cheered by your fellow protesters, then you won't move, and you'll hope that police officer will break your delicate little ribs.
Well, but the point of it is that what's the crazy things? Actions have their consequences, okay? If you drive down the highway, as a matter of fact, how many times in my years I can remember one time, this goes back about, 5 or 6 years ago, I'm driving east on Highway 40, and I'm in a horrendous rainstorm. I mean, to the point where I'm maybe down to like 30, 35 miles an hour. And a guy in a lifted pickup truck with the big old monster tires, nothing against that, if you want to do that, that's all well and good, passes me like doing 80 miles an hour. I think to myself, how the hell can that guy see? I get a little bit further down the highway toward where we're almost getting onto the Daniel Boone Bridge, going east on 40 across the Missouri into Chesterfield. And guess what? He smashed into the center median, spun around, and took out 3 cars with him. And I'm thinking to myself, how did I know that was going to happen? Once again, you do crazy stuff, and you have to essentially live with the consequences. And once again, I had this somewhat argument with my son, my young son, yesterday morning, because my son is not on the same political spectrum that I am on. And he goes through the whole thing. Well, that's freedom of speech. Blah, 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 blah. And I go, it's freedom of speech, but yet the problem is that freedom of speech has its limits. And once again, there's the old crazy story about you can stand on the street corner, you can on public ground, and you can say all sorts of crazy stuff and yell and scream about how the government screwed up, and that's all well and good. But if you stand up in the middle of a movie theater and you yell fire, your freedom of speech has ended. You can't do that. And there's certain things that you can't do. And I guess the thing that bothers me about this is that all over the weekend, how many stories did you see? Graduation ceremonies interrupted by protesters. Okay. People have sweated blood, some people to pay for their tuition, worked very hard, spent 4 years, maybe 5 or 6 if they're on the 5 or 6 year plan to graduate, and you get some numbskulls who show up and ruin your graduation ceremony. I mean, once again, my right to swing my fist ends at the tip of your nose, right?
I agree completely, Brad.
And when you have essentially violated my rights to have my graduation ceremony in peace, I think that the wrestling team from the college should have full authority to go over and talk to those protesters and essentially demonstrate some of their wrestling moves on them. What do you think, John?
I think that in many universities we've seen on social media a number of fraternity members have had productive confrontations with some of these protesters.
And who would have thought that the frat boys, the same people that Anheuser-Busch made fun of are now...
That's right, are now standing up. But we shouldn't be surprised by that, because at a certain point, everybody has their limit. And at a certain point, you get a bunch of young men together who happen to love the United States and love their country and are tired of some of the nonsense outside of their fraternity house. They'll have something to say about it, and they'll take action.
John, you know what? You're a stock market guy. You watch the stock market very closely. And if I had some inside information, I would pass along to you. And my inside information would be, I'm making this up, of course. My inside information for you would be, John, buy AB. Buy AB. Buy as much AB stock as you can buy. And you go, well, Brad, I don't know about that. Their stock's not done well. They're still recovering from the infamous thing they had a year ago with the transgender dude. And I said, John, let me tell you, I got inside information. I have a friend of mine who works their advertising agency. They're bringing back the Greatest American Hero campaign. And they're going to have the guy who was the lead singer of Survivor, and they're going to have the world's greatest American hero. Then announce with a deep voice going on, that's right, we've hired the frat boys who are going to come back and drink Bud Light. Yes,
that's right.
Frat boys who are upholding that flag at that University of North Carolina. The frat boys who are red, white, and blue, and they're wearing their star-spangled underwear. They're coming back. Let's lift a Bud Light too. And the stock would go through the ceiling. Because
everybody would buy it, just as a patriotic duty, Brad. People would actually request the old stock certificates just so they could post one on their wall.
Right. People go, oh my God, that's the world's best thing. I'm buying it. And all of a sudden, that ad would start at 6 o'clock in the morning. By noon, every liquor store, every Schnucks and Deerberg, you go to the beer section and the Bud Light would be gone. It'd be off the shelves.
Every strip mall dispensary would turn from marijuana into beer.
Right. We're not selling that kind of bud anymore. We're selling.
We got a different. We do have bud tenders, but they're actual bud.
The first time I heard that term, I thought to myself, OMG, bud tenders. Okay. Hey, bud, tend this, okay?
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?